average session duration dropped from 8 hours to 52 minutes. Users were randomly logged out because the app used Supabase.js without its Supabase/SSR and no middleware. That Supabase/SSR package requires Next.js 13.4.0 or later. In Next.js 14+, the cookies API is synchronous in server components but remains async in middleware. The article's code uses await cookies, which is correct for Next.js 14+, but will fail in Next.js 13.4.13. 5 where cookies is synchronous. Always check your Next.js version and adjust accordingly. The article mentions that getUser triggers token refresh but does not show the alternative getSession approach. In middleware, getSession also triggers a refresh and is slightly lighter. Use getSession when you only need the session object, not the full user profile. Here's the correct pattern. Supabase session cookies can exceed the 4 KB per cookie limit in some browsers, e.g., Safari, when storing large JWTs or custom user metadata. This silently drops the session. Mitigate by minimizing custom claims in the JWT and using the auth user's raw metadata field sparingly. If you hit the limit, consider storing session data server-side and using a session ID cookie instead. Let's break down Supabase Auth with Next.js 16, the complete 2026 guide, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. Supabase Auth is a server-side authentication system that uses JWTs and session cookies. On login, you get an access token that expires in 1 hour and a refresh token. Middleware is the layer that automatically refreshes the access token before it expires, preventing silent logouts. The correct package for App Router is at Supabase/SSR. It provides 3 factory functions: create browser client for client components, create server client for server components and root handlers, and the same create server client used in middleware. It manages cookie-based sessions automatically. Install both packages. The Supabase.js package is a peer dependency. Set your environment variables from the Supabase dashboard. This is the browser client factory for client components. It reads and writes cookies via document cookie. The server client factory uses Next headers cookies. It reads cookies from the cookie store and attempts to set them, but in server components, setting cookies is not allowed, that's expected, and middleware handles it. The middleware client factory is used in middleware.ts. It calls Supabase Auth getUser, which triggers token refresh if the access token is expired. The matcher excludes static assets to avoid unnecessary API calls. Middleware is the non-negotiable token refresh layer. It runs on every request before the page renders. The critical call is Supabase Auth getUser. This is not just a user check, it refreshes expired tokens. Without it, sessions expire after 1 hour. Here's the full middleware.ts. It refreshes the token, then redirects unauthenticated users to login and authenticated users away from login. The matcher ensures it doesn't run on static files. Server actions handle authentication flows on the server. They use the server client with cookies. Each flow has specific requirements. Sign up requires email confirmation. OAuth needs a callback route that exchanges the auth code for a session. The sign up action creates a new user. By default, Supabase sends a confirmation email. The user must click the link to verify their email before they can sign in. Sign in with password set session cookies automatically. For OAuth, we redirect the user to the provider, and the callback route exchanges the auth code for a session. The OAuth callback route exchanges the auth code for a session. It reads the code from the URL, calls exchange code for session, and redirects to the dashboard. This is the server-side exchange that prevents token exposure. Root protection happens at 2 levels. Middleware redirects unauthenticated users before any code runs, and server components fetch the user during render. Always use getUser. On the server, it validates the JWT with Supabase. getSession reads cookies without validation and is insecure. In a server component, we call getUser to validate the session. If the user is not authenticated, we redirect to login. Then we fetch user-specific data using the authenticated client. A layout guard protects all routes under a root group. It fetches the user and wraps children in a user provider, so client components can access the user without refetching. Row-level security enforces authorization at the database level. Even if your application code has a bug, RLS policies prevent unauthorized access. The auth function returns the authenticated user's ID from the JWT. Enable RLS on your profiles table, then create policies that restrict access to the user's own row. The trigger automatically creates a profile when a user signs up. PKCE is the default flow in at Supabase/SSR. It stores the code verifier in an HTTP-only cookie before the redirect, so the callback can read it. Without PKCE, the verifier is lost on page refresh, causing session loss. The PKCE callback uses createServerClient with cookies. It exchanges the auth code for a session. The code verifier is automatically read from the HTTP-only cookie. Server-side OAuth avoids pop-ups that can be blocked by browsers. The user hits a server route that constructs the authorization URL and redirects to the provider. The callback exchanges the code server-side, keeping tokens secure. This server route initiates OAuth by calling sign-in with OAuth with a redirect to pointing to your own callback. The user is redirected to Google, and after authorization, they come back to your callback. Real-time subscriptions use WebSockets to push changes instantly. Subscribe inside a use effect with cleanup to avoid memory leaks. Never subscribe in server components, or WebSockets don't belong there. This custom hook subscribes to real-time changes on a table. It cleans up the channel on unmount to prevent memory leaks. For many users, batch subscriptions into a single channel. Serverless functions like Next.js API routes must validate the user's session before touching the database. Use createRouteHandler client with cookies from the request. Never trust a user ID from the request body, extract it from the JWT. In an API route, we create a route handler client, call getUser, to validate the session, and then query the database. RLS policies automatically use the user's JWT. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that 40% session drop happened. Users reported being randomly logged out. The team assumed the browser client handled token refresh internally, but without middleware, the access token expired after 1 hour, and there was no mechanism to refresh it on server-side navigation. The root cause was omitting middleware.ts, so the access token expired after 1 hour with no refresh mechanism, silently logging users out. The fix was to install at Supabase/SSR and create the 3 client factories. The key change was adding middleware.ts that calls Supabase Auth getUser on every request. This triggers automatic token refresh when the access token is near expiry. Session duration increased from 52 minutes to over 7 days. The most common mistake is omitting middleware. Without it, the access token expires after 1 hour and users are silently logged out on server-side navigation. Always add middleware.ts with getUser. Using the browser client in a server component breaks SSR because it tries to access document cookie, which doesn't exist on the server. Always use createServerClient with cookies in server components. getSession reads cookies without validating the JWT with Supabase Auth. This is a security vulnerability because cookies can be forged. Always use getUser on the server, it validates the token. To debug auth issues, first verify middleware.ts exists at the project root. Use curl to check that set cookie headers are present. Grep your codebase to ensure you're using createServerClient in server components. And check the Supabase dashboard for error logs. Let's run through some common interview questions. What is the purpose of middleware in Supabase Auth? It refreshes access tokens on every request, preventing silent logouts. Why use getUser instead of getSession on the server? getUser validates the JWT with Supabase Auth. getSession reads unvalidated cookies. How does PKCE prevent auth code interception? It stores a code verifier in an HTTP-only cookie before redirect, ensuring only the original client can exchange the code. and a few frequently asked questions. Why does my session disappear on page refresh? Likely missing middleware or using getSession instead of getUser. Can I use Supabase.js without its Supabase/SSR? No, Supabase.js alone uses local storage, which breaks SSR. At Supabase/SSR is mandatory for app router. How do I protect API routes? Use createRouteHandler client with cookies and call getUser to validate the session before processing the request. Let's recap the key takeaways. At Supabase/SSR is mandatory for app router. Middleware with getUser prevents session drops. Use 3 client factories: browser, server, middleware. RLS enforces authorization at database level. Ready to go deeper? Up next, TRPC v11 plus Next.js 16. Complete setup and best practices, then how to build an AI agent with Next.js, LangChain, and Supabase, then Next.js 16 caching strategies explained, the 2026 guide, and Prisma ORM best practices with Next.js 16 in 2026. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.